When I first got out of the Army in the summer of 2021, my family and I bought a small acreage on the Michigan countryside. We wanted to be closer to family and thought it was a perfect place to finally settle down and put down roots. My spouse and I had three children, two sons ages 3 and 7, and in the middle was our 5-year-old daughter. They were tickled to death to be able to live in such a big house with so much room to run, and there were virtually no predators or things we needed to be afraid of out there aside from a few wolves, which generally keep their distance from homes. We didn't have any venomous snakes or anything else in the area to be scared of, so the kids were free to run in and out of the yard as much as they wanted. One night, as we were getting ready to settle everyone down for bed, we had the back screen door shut, but the main door was wide open. All of a sudden, our little Jack Russell Terrier, Max, started barking at the back door at something outside, so our daughter went to go check. It was an uncharacteristically brave move for her. She's typically the most shy and easily spooked of the bunch. When she got to the back door, she yelled over her shoulder at us to come quick. She could hear wolves howling off in the distance. We stood at the door and listened briefly before I opened the door to usher everyone out onto the porch so we could hear better. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I assured them that as long as we stayed on the porch, we'd be safe. Wolves don't come up to the house. They're probably just howling to find each other, and wouldn't it be fun if we should happen to be able to see one of them crossing the field? We stood out on the porch for a while. The mosquitoes were just about to eat us alive, so I was ready to usher everyone back in when my youngest son suddenly jumped to his feet and pointed off in the distance, yelling, "Look!" When I turned, I couldn't really believe what I was seeing. At the edge of our property, peeking out of the trees, there was a large glowing pair of eyes that seemed to be intently watching us. My oldest son seemed a little afraid and asked me what it was, but I couldn't really say for sure. I'd never seen anything like it. I told the kids to stay put on the porch and I'd go take a look. My wife yelled at me not to be stupid, but by this time I was already committed to the task. I slowly walked off the porch, making my way closer to this glowing set of eyes. As I got closer, I began to make out the pupils and the hair growing around them, but I was only more confused. Whatever it was back behind those trees was at least as tall as me, and was capable of squinting and raising its brow in an almost human-like way. I got about 20 feet from it, and I still couldn't make out any more than the upper part of its face, but that was enough. I decided I wasn't going to get any closer and turned to head back. Turning my back to it was a mistake, though. As soon as I did, the thing came bounding out of the trees, pushing me to the ground with this heavy growl. I could hear my family on the porch screaming in terror as they watched this thing pin me face first into the dirt. I managed to yell for my wife to take the kids inside, and by the time I was able to look over again, they were all gone, and the window blinds drawn. I guess that was done so the kids couldn't see me. Although my wife and I still joke about how easy it was for them to just go in and leave me out there alone to fight this thing. I have no doubt in my mind that this was some type of human-wolf hybrid. I don't know, a werewolf maybe? The way it moved was very human, but the rest of it was purely dog. It smelled like a dog too. As soon as it knocked me down, it just took off into the woods. It didn't attack me or anything. I don't know, maybe it was just marking its territory. We eventually ended up moving out of that house. There's no way I'm having my kids around that thing. Hi, Donovan. I've been hanging out for a while and listening to everyone's stories and trying to decide if I'm brave enough to share my own encounter. Well, I guess I am. Hopefully no one will rag on me in the comments because this is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Before now, my best friend was the only person I ever told. I'm not even sure what to call this creature I saw. A demon? A spirit? A witch? I guess you can all decide for yourself. I would be tremendously relieved if someone else out there says that they had a similar experience growing up. I grew up in Ashland, Nebraska, which is a small town about a half hour from Omaha. I was an only child. My parents tried to have other kids, but after me, my mom had 3 miscarriages and they stopped trying. Some people say an only child means you get spoiled, but that wasn't my experience. If anything, I felt like there was a lot of pressure on me to be the best I could be. All of their expectations were riding on me, you know? But it was an okay childhood. Like most kids, I had a fear of the dark when I was small. I remember when I was really little, my mom would leave this nightlight on for me. But by the time I was 7 or so, my dad said I was old enough to sleep in the dark. It gets pretty windy in Ashland, and I spent many nights huddled beneath the blankets, scared, as I listened to the wind howling and the scratching sound from the branches against the windows. I had a stuffed animal that was given to me when I was really little by my Uncle Charlie. It was this unicorn named Tad. I remember Uncle Charlie telling me Tad would always protect me. The horn was a magical weapon, he said, that would ward off monsters. I slept with that unicorn from the time I was a little kid until I was 10 years old. I never really had any nightmares. Uncle Charlie died when I was 10. He was killed by a drunk driver. I didn't really understand death at that time, but I knew it meant I would never see him again. A whole bunch of family came from out of state for the funeral, and I had 3 of my cousins share my room for the weekend. When everybody left for home, I realized Tad was missing. One of my cousins must have swiped it. I cried to my mother, who called my aunt, but none of the kids confessed. I carried on until my dad finally had enough of that and told me it was time to grow up. I tried to behave and put it behind me, but I found it difficult to sleep at night. Shortly after Tad disappeared, I started feeling a presence in my room. I was convinced that someone was hiding in the shadows. My mom would come in and turn on all the lights and show me that there was no one there, making me look along with her inside the closet and under the bed to convince me. Then she'd leave the room and the feeling would start again. I started having vivid nightmares of a witch. Little kid stuff, I know, but they were so real. The nightmares lasted for months, and I started doing poorly in school. I was simply afraid to go to sleep. I would wait for my dad to go to bed, and then I'd turn on the lights. And sometimes I'd be okay, but most nights I would dream of her and wake up in a cold sweat. Then one night it happened. I found out it wasn't just a bad dream. I saw the witch when I wasn't asleep. I was lying in bed, concentrating on getting myself to relax. The only light was a nightlight because I was trying to get over my fear. I had closed my eyes and I was trying to breathe deep and evenly, like my mom had told me to do. Suddenly, I had this feeling like someone was on the bed with me. My eyes flew open, and she was right there, her face only inches above mine. Her eyes were dark and glittered with malice, and she was grinning like the joke was on me. I tried to scream, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, not even an inch, and no sound would come out of my mouth. It was like I was under this spell. She leaned over me. I could smell her foul breath. I tried to tell myself it was only a nightmare, but I knew it was real. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I could hear things in the background, like branches scratching on the window, and my dog's toenails clicking on the hardwood floor as he came down the hallway. If it was a dream, I wouldn't have heard those things, right? I could barely breathe as she stared into my eyes, her grin widening as she held her hand up to my face, one bony finger extended. It looked like a claw to me, the nails pointed and black. I almost passed out from fear. She lowered her finger to the side of my neck and pressed the nail to my skin, with a wet-sounding chuckle rumbling in her throat. It hurt like the dickens, but I couldn't move or speak. I tried so hard to scream, afraid she was killing me. I was completely at her mercy. My dog saved me. Maybe he sensed my distress from out in the hallway. I don't know. All at once, he pushed his big head through the bedroom door and started barking like crazy at the old hag. She made an angry sound between a growl and a hiss, and then she simply disappeared. 1 second, she was there. The next, she was gone. As soon as she vanished, I was able to move again. I ran screaming from my parents' bedroom, absolutely hysterical, and crashed right into my mom in the hall. My dog's barking had woken them all up. Of course, they didn't believe me, but when I told them the hag had poked me with her fingernail, my mom brought me into the bright light to take a look. There was an angry crescent-shaped welt on my neck, just like fingernails make. Thankfully, the skin wasn't broken. My dad thought I had scratched myself. My mom took pity on me and allowed my dog to sleep on the bed with me after that. And a good boy that he was, he did, every night for the rest of my childhood. I never saw that figure again, but I still feel uneasy in that room when I go home to visit. My parents just don't understand. but I always choose to sleep in a hotel instead of there in my old bedroom. So I'm wondering what you all think. Was it a demon? A witch? A ghost? Please believe me when I say, it was definitely not a nightmare. I'm telling you this because I figure you're the only person who will believe me. It sounds like a joke, but my winter job is shooting snakes in the Everglades in Florida. In summer, I do jobs up north like lead horse trail rides in the mountains. So in Florida, we capture and euthanize Burmese pythons. They're the worst. They're an invasive species and totally screwing up the ecosystem down there, and a female can lay over 100 eggs a year. Actually, a recent female was captured with over 120 eggs inside of her, which set a new record. This is official, by the way, and we're paid by the foot to keep these invaders at bay. The cash prizes can even be up to $2,500. So the day this happened, me and my coworker Jake got going early. I drove the SUV to the spot we'd staked out the day before. It was at the edge of the Everglades National Park. But there's nothing out there except for marsh grass, and you can see a long way since it's so flat. Sometimes there's trees, but mostly it's just grass and scrub. Then it'll get swampy and there's a river that runs through there. There was a lot of fog that morning, and we figured we wouldn't be able to find much until it lifted. We parked, and since we had some time to kill, we drank the rest of our coffee and just talked about our strategy. A lot of times one of us will just drive the SUV while the other one walks. We'll take turns and we'll signal when either of us sees a snake. We flipped a coin that day, and I was going to be the one walking first. Anyway, we got tired of waiting for the fog to lift, so we decided to start out a bit. It was still a little dark, but I got a flashlight, so I grabbed it and we got out. I walked along that dirt road for a long time and saw nothing, so eventually I got back in the SUV and we just rode around. But we couldn't see much because the fog wasn't lifting. So finally we both got out. We just started walking through the grass, staring down at the ground, searching for any signs of snakes. After a while, eventually we saw a big piece of snake skin in the grass. It was a huge shed, a python skin for sure. We walked away, we figured the snake had gone, and after a while, we saw it in the grass. There was no mistaking that python pattern in the grass, tan and dark brown. You can't miss it when you've seen as many snakes as we have. I gave Jake our signal, 2 fingers in a V. We quickly slipped on our leather gloves. I jumped toward the pattern moving through the grass and looked for its head. You want to grab the snake right under the head so it can't bite you. I've still been bit plenty of times though. I grabbed and got a grip of that fat sucker right under its head. Perfect. Jake grabbed it too, and he got out the big bag to put it in. You're not allowed to just shoot them right there, because they got to be killed humanely. We bag them and get them shot in the head later. That snake must have been 10 feet long once we stretched it out. We were yelling and whooping. We were so happy we finally found one. But just when we got that snake under control enough to wrestle it into the bag, I heard a hiss. Python hisses are really creepy with a distinctive sound. This was worse though. The noise was so loud that it drowned out any noise of any other bugs and birds, which is saying a lot because they are plenty loud in the Everglades, especially in the morning. But the worst part about that noise, that hiss, is that it wasn't coming from the snake. It was coming from behind us. What the heck is that? Jake yelled. Nothing, I said, hoping I was right. Get that snake in the bag, I said. But before we could successfully bag that sucker, I heard something else, like a person or a really big animal crashing through the grass and brush. And then Jake screamed and dropped his end of the snake. I looked up from the snake, and this thing was standing there. I don't know what it was, but it was big, like bigger than me and Jake. I don't know how it snuck up on us. Maybe it crawled through the grass on all fours, blending in with the darkness, and then got up. It was black with these yellow eyes and this lizard face, but it had a body like a human, or at least human-shaped. It started toward us and opened its mouth. I've never seen teeth that sharp and that big. They were like alligator teeth. Man, we needed the money, but we dropped that snake and ran. We got back to the SUV and I asked Jake what we'd seen. He shook his head, like he couldn't talk, but just shaking his head back and forth. So I don't know exactly what we saw. Was it a man? A reptile? An alien? Or was it even some creature made up of all three? There is really no way to tell, but for sure it wasn't something most people even believe exists. I know it does. I still hear that hiss in my sleep. And even though I don't know what that thing was, I know it was evil. I could tell that. And so, because you'll ask, yes, I've been out in the glade since, but no, I haven't seen it again. I think that happened to us because we were just at the wrong place on the wrong day. A few summers ago, I decided I wanted to get away by myself to somewhere that I've never been. I was kind of fed up with people at the time and just wanted some nature and solitude. I found this A-frame cabin rental in Maine that sounded just like what I needed. I'd never been to Maine, but I always wanted to check it out. This place was near the Basin Preserve. It was gorgeous there, and the temperatures were so perfect, especially for late July. I was coming from the heat of Kansas City, so I was usually stuck inside the air conditioning. I spent some really peaceful days relaxing and hiking. I even found this great place to pick blueberries. It felt so nice and relaxing, the exact opposite of the hectic city life I had been living. My cabin was in the woods, and it had this really cozy porch that became my favorite place to hang out. I tend to be a real night owl, so one night I was out there on the porch reading with my headlamp. It was around 1 a.m., and I had a book that I just hadn't been able to put down. I heard this loud cracking sound, like someone stepping on a big branch. I was really engrossed in my reading, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But then I heard it again. I turned my headlamp to high and aimed the light towards the woods. And about 8 feet off the ground, I saw these huge eyes reflecting back at me. They were bright golden yellow and kind of slanted. They were staring directly at me. I'm not that good at judging distance, but I want to say maybe 20 or 30 yards away. When I saw those eyes, I was just filled with this intense dread. I was gauging the height of it by comparing where I saw the eyes in relation to the outhouse that was between us and a little to the side. I didn't see anything other than the eyes before I rushed inside. I locked the doors and I was running around the house like a crazy person, looking to see if there was anything I could use for a weapon. I got the windows closed except for this one that was up high that needed a tool to reach. Through that window screen, I could hear this thing slowly walking toward the cabin, with steps that definitely sounded like something walking upright. It sounded like it was slowly walking back and forth in front of the cabin, over and over. Then it got quiet, completely silent. I was too scared to look, but made myself look anyway. I was peeking through the side of the curtain, but I couldn't see anything at all. Then I heard this hellacious howl. It was like a wolf howl mixed with a human howling in terrible pain. The A-frame had a loft, so I decided I would climb up the ladder and see if I could spot it from the upper window. The backyard of the cabin had this bamboo fencing that was about 6 feet tall. I was looking out the window into the backyard. The back porch light was on, and all of a sudden, I see this thing jump over the fence into the backyard. I mean, it easily jumped that fence. It was so huge. It had this huge snout and really sharp canines. It was black and had this massive ruff of fur around its neck. It was so beefy looking, like a bodybuilder. I think I would describe the head like a giant wolf head, 2 to 3 times the size of a real wolf head. It was pacing back and forth. Then it was out of sight and came closer to the house, and I heard it tapping on the windows. At that point, I was just about dead from fright. I wanted to call someone, the police, anybody, but I didn't have any service. Then I heard that terrifying howling scream again. It came back into sight, and I saw it sniffing the air, and its ears were moving. It went back and stood next to the fence. I was mentally begging it just to leave. I felt so much dread filling my entire body. My hands were sweating and my heart rate was off the charts. Then it just jumped back over the fence. I was listening so intently. I never heard it walk away. No footsteps into the distance or anything. I was praying that it was really gone and not just hiding on the other side of the fence. I tried to come back to my senses and breathe steadily, but I was really messed up. I didn't want to stay there, but obviously I wasn't going to risk going outside to my car. I stayed up in that loft that whole night. There was a futon up there that really wasn't that comfortable. Not that I could sleep anyway. Early in the morning, I packed up my stuff and I looked out every window to make sure that I didn't see that thing anywhere. Then I made this mad dash to my car and started my drive home. I had paid for a whole week's stay at the cabin, but there was no way I would ever go back there again. I drove to Phippsburg and checked myself into a hotel. I did contact the owner of the cabin and tried to describe what I experienced. I got so emotional when I was reliving it that I guess he took pity on me and gave me a full refund. But he said he had never heard of that kind of creature in those woods before. He said he would report it to the authorities. I'm just glad I got away from there unharmed. We used to have a farm in North Carolina, and I lived there most of my childhood. It wasn't a regular farm. We actually grew pine trees. Pine needles are popular in the landscaping business, so we grew the trees in order to produce pine straw. We would bale it up every year and sell it to gardening businesses. The house was in the middle of 500 acres of longleaf pines. It was a custom house built in the 1930s and had a huge picture window in the living room. The window was basically the whole length of the room, probably about 50 feet wide. The house was built on a slight hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground and looked out into the pine trees as far as you could see. My best friend had come over for the weekend, and we were just messing around in that room. It was winter, so there was a fire going. We were throwing all kinds of stuff into the fireplace to see what it would do. It was getting into the evening and the fire was dying down. We were going to sleep in that room, so we started building a big castle of couch cushions and blankets for our bed. We started hearing the dogs barking outside. They sounded really far away. The property stretches for almost a mile, and the dogs had free rein a lot of the time. I assumed they were chasing off some animal. My friend was staring out the window and not saying anything. I was like, "What's up?" He just kept staring and said he felt like he was seeing things. Of course, that got me curious, so I started staring out the window too. Nothing happened for a few minutes, and I kept asking what he saw. He kept getting annoyed and shushing me so he could focus. Then we both saw a dark, shadowy shape move from one tree to the next, kind of half running and half leaping from one tree to another. It was probably about 30 yards from the house. We couldn't actually tell if it was coming closer or not, because the moonlight was reflecting off the slushy snow in the yard and distorting the view. But the figure seemed unnaturally tall. I guess we should have been more freaked out to see some person randomly on our property out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't hear the dogs at all at this point. We kept staring out there to try to figure out what it was. We should have gone to get my dad, but he was always overreacting to stuff and getting belligerent. He was the kind of type of shoot first, ask questions later, so I didn't want to sound an alarm if it wasn't necessary. But we were definitely a little nervous, and I didn't want to draw attention to whatever it was. We didn't really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was owned by a paper company, so it was miles of uncultivated trees. You never really saw people around the farm unless they intended to be there for a good reason. About 5 minutes later, we saw it again. But this time, it's swooping from tree to tree without touching the ground. And when it went through the air, I swear it had a wingspan. Like a 7-foot-tall human-type figure, but with a wingspan. It kept changing trees and was sporadically vanishing and reappearing. Then finally, it settled on one tree and sat there facing toward us. I got the binoculars out of the drawer, and when I zoomed in on its face, I knew something wasn't right. It didn't even have facial features, but it was staring toward me with these creepy red eyes. It was crouched in the tree and looked like this giant half-human, half-bat thing. My friend looked through the binoculars and completely lost it. Then, while it was looking toward us, it got down from the tree and stepped toward the house. We ran out of the room so fast to get my dad. By the time we got back into the room with him, there was no one to be seen. But both of the dogs were barking crazily and scratching at the front door. That was really unusual. If there ever was a creature in the woods, they'd be all over it and chasing it away. We let them in, and they were literally trembling. We ran through the house, locking all the doors and the windows. Living in the country like that, we rarely kept the doors locked. Every time I got to another door, I was sure that thing was going to beat me to it and burst in. We got everything locked up and walked around the house over and over, making sure no one had gotten in without us knowing. My dad was going to go out there with his gun, but I begged him to wait until morning. He slept in the living room with us, not that any of us got much sleep. I never understood why my dad wouldn't call the police. He always had this we take care of our own mentality and hated getting the authorities involved in anything. The next day we went out there to look, and there were definitely footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between the trees, and then we actually saw where someone had been standing right in front of the window. But they weren't human. These were weird, long, three-pronged prints. We stayed freaked out for a pretty long time. That's when my dad installed cameras and alarms all around the house. We finally started to relax a little after that. I think the thing that freaked me out the most was how scared the dogs had been. They didn't usually back down from anything, and it almost made me think it was something supernatural. I'm not so good at this part. I'm not so good at telling the story. I've never been much of a writer or a public speaker. I do have something that people do need to hear. There's something nasty living in Croatan National Forest. That's North Carolina, a place I wish I'd never been. I wrestle alligators for a living. I don't scare easy, and I know nasty when I see it. I'm not talking about a bear or coyote, understand? I hadn't been in North Carolina long. I did most of my work around Mississippi at the time. Lots of alligator wranglers in Mississippi, though. Work was available in North Carolina, and I was available for work. I hadn't found much of anything, except a cheap motel and a bar where I could leave my business card. I got the call when I was close to giving up. Another day without a paycheck might have sent me back home. Lucky for me, Linda's morning had started with an 11-footer on her front lawn. Linda's not a real name, and she doesn't need to get wrapped up in this. So don't go digging, okay? Alligator wrangler. Let me tell you what that means. Mount the back, squat, crank on the gator's neck. It sounds cruel, but if you aren't locking in the camel clutch, like you're the Iron Sheik, you're gonna get bit. Restrain the gator however you got to, and then relocate it to someplace safe. Try not to get bit on the way out. That's all there is to gators. An 11-footer isn't a joke, though. It took me a while to size her up, but I got her wrangled and I got paid. Loaded her into my truck for transportation. You're welcome, Linda. Now, I should have had another pair of hands with me, but I couldn't afford to pay someone at the time, not unless I was eating ice cubes for dinner. The drive out to Croatan wasn't far. I had to take it slow on account of my passenger, but we got there without any hiccups. Got deep into them trees, too deep, I guess. The ground underneath the truck was soft. It sucked in the soles of my boots. What's important is I got the gator out. Banged my elbow pretty bad, but I got her out, and I let her go and she ran until I couldn't see her anymore. I thought she was scared of the truck. Usually an engine will clear an area of any wildlife for at least a couple of hours. I had turned the truck off before I jumped out, but I was still surprised to realize that the gator and me weren't alone. There was a great loud whooping in the trees around me. It echoed so many times that I had to spin around. I saw a whole lot of nothing in every direction. It was weird, though. I knew that immediately. The wailing or whooping or whatever you want to call it, it sounded like that kind of yelling that chimpanzees do. If you had told me I'd wandered into some nature documentary, I would have believed it. After all, there aren't any apes in North Carolina. The only time I heard whooping like that was at 2 a.m. with the TV on and a drink in my hand. This wasn't TV, though. It made my skin crawl. The hair stood up on my forearms. I jumped back into the truck in too much of a rush. When I hit the gas, my tires spun and sunk into the mud outside. Doesn't get much worse than that, does it? What choice did I have? I cut the engine again and jumped out. Had to get it free somehow. Before I could inspect the tires too closely, there was a banging. The sound echoed again, but this time I got a good idea of which direction it was coming from. Someone out in the woods was going major league on a tree, swinging a bat or a branch or who knows what. Do animals knock down trees like that? I still don't know of any. I thought maybe someone was playing a prank on me, welcoming the outsider to North Carolina with a bit of fun. I called out, told whoever it was to knock it off. Then the nasty thing in Croatan National Forest called back. It roared, screamed really, like a man in a fight of his life. Something bigger than me, bigger than any animal I'd seen. It ran between the trees in the distance. Red fur, I think, covered head to toe. I jumped back in the truck and figured I had one chance. I rocked from forward to reverse, trying to sway my way out of whatever hole I dug. I remember whispering to myself like a lunatic. I probably should have been praying, right? Instead, I was muttering every curse I could to motivate myself to escape. Then it slammed into the side of my truck. It hit the passenger side like a linebacker. I've never heard steel cry like that. The whole side of the vehicle got bent out of shape. Windows cracked, and I didn't care about any of that. What mattered was that beast had pushed my truck free of the mud. When it landed back on all four tires, I tried reverse again and peeled right out of the woods. There was another flash of fur in my rearview mirror. I think it wanted to make sure I didn't change my mind. I didn't. I got out of there as quick as I could. Got out of North Carolina, too. I guess that's why this story felt important to tell. Whatever lives in that area, it doesn't want us there. Mississippi isn't so bad, even if the gator market's a little oversaturated. I'm still trying to figure out what I experienced, even as I tell it. The hairs on my neck and arms raise just at the thought of that afternoon. I hope I'll find someone who has had a similar encounter to mine, so I can sleep easier at night. It was the middle of February, usually a bitter cold month where I live in Oregon. But this year was extra wet, cold and wet. We get a lot of rain in the Northwest, but this kind of torrential downpour was odd for this time of year. I'd gone to a friend's house after school, totally normal. We sat around and played video games and ate snacks his mom made for us. The only thing even remotely odd about the day was the rain. I was a little anxious about the walk home. I knew I'd get soaked, and being cold and soaking wet stinks. I knew my mom would start bugging me about getting home for supper and homework soon. So I had no choice but to get up and throw my hood over my head and go. I always walk everywhere with headphones in. I listen to music. It helps the time go faster on my way home. The walk takes about 25 minutes depending on how fast I'm walking. I head north toward a small lake that has benches and play stuff for kids. We call it a pond. The word pond is less intimidating, maybe, so everyone feels more confident walking around it. I don't know. People feed ducks when the weather is good. No ducks today. They must have gotten the memo that the weather sucked. I didn't see anything. There was nothing out of the ordinary going on at all. In fact, at this point, I wasn't even thinking about anything strange. But it wasn't long before I felt something off in the air. I looked around, sort of swinging my whole head back and forth, because I was wearing my hood to keep my head dry. I wasn't able to see really great by doing that, but either way, I still saw nothing. And that was the thing that threw me off. I saw nothing. Usually there's at least someone as stupid as me walking in the pouring rain or something. Maybe a couple of ducks would be floating across the water. Something. But everything was eerily still. I looked out across the pond toward the road. There had to be traffic, a car or two coming home. It was that time of day after all. People were coming home from work. But no, I didn't see a car. No one was walking around the pond or in the street. Even the glassy water on top of the pond had stopped moving. It was like time had frozen. I took my headphones out. The jarring cut from the music to the dreadful silence caused a ripple to go up my spine. I almost screamed. The rain pouring down made no sound. My feet splashing on the wet concrete did make a sound. I quickly jammed my headphones back in to make sure I wasn't going crazy. The music was playing loudly. I took them off again and shoved them into my pocket. While I was worried that maybe I lost my hearing or something, I wasn't paying attention because the next thing I knew, the sky was completely black. No light, just clouds so dark and thick, it made me think of my mom's hair when I was a baby. This thought spooked me just as much as the silence in the dark clouds. I'm not the sentimental type. I started walking much faster, as fast as I could. The way my feet were moving caused the water to splash up to my knees. The raining was pooling on the hood of my jacket, and the rain was dumping off of my hood into my vision, and still, I couldn't hear it at all. I caught my breath and leaned down to pick up a rock, and I threw it in a huge lob into the pond. It seemed to stop time. Finally, it hit the water with this big, echoey plunk. I remember thinking, thank God. I started walking fast again. I wanted to get home as quickly as possible. I could feel the dread in my bones. The silence and the loneliness had gripped me tight. My head was feeling foggy. I took several quick steps and my legs started giving out on me. I fell sideways. Now I was truly drenched. I may as well have gone for a swim. Something in me tightened even more, and I had this sensation like I was the last human on earth. I have never been so afraid in my life. If I didn't think of my mom and dad at home waiting for me, I may have stayed down and cried until the rain swallowed me. I pushed myself up onto my knees and then to my feet. I looked around and I realized I hadn't made it nearly as far around the pond as I had thought. I could turn and walk back to the entrance to the park I'd came in less than a minute. I looked that way and saw this old black sedan parked right where I'd come in. The lights were on. The wipers were going. I couldn't see who was in the car, but I could sense something. There were people in that car. I could feel them watching me. I knew I had no choice. I walked back the way I came. My body told me there was no way I could make it if I kept going. I don't know how I knew that, but I just did. I kept my eyes down and watched my feet. With each passing step as I got further from the pond, the sound of my footsteps returned little by little. I kicked the water and heard the familiar splash. When I stepped past the gate marking the park entrance, I saw that the black sedan was gone. My girlfriend planned a special trip for just the two of us. We drove through the high desert and snow, all sorts of weird weather to Zion National Park. The park is only part of the area. There's cliffs and canyons all around for miles. Some people come up to do the tourist thing, and some come to hike the hardcore trails. My girlfriend showed me pictures of all the trails and the hikes that we could do. I told her whichever trail she wanted to hike was fine with me. So of course she picked the most intense hike there was. The trail app said it was about 9 hours in total. 9 hours of hiking seemed insane to me, but what do I know? We got up early before the sunrise, packed some snacks and water, and headed out. To get to the trail, we had to drive about an hour and a half into the desert, and then turn up into the canyons. The cliffs were all these strange alien colors. We parked in some cactus field. That is really the only way I can describe it. I didn't even see the trail marker. My girlfriend had to point it out to me. She led and I followed. The trail was mostly flat and easy, so I thought the hike would just be a really long walk. I couldn't have been more wrong. After walking for 30 minutes or so, I started sweating. The sun was up now. It was getting hotter every minute. I had to stop for some water and my girlfriend said, "We're not even at the trail yet." I kept my mouth shut. We walked and walked, but now we were going down and there was some shade, so it helped a little. It was quiet, very quiet. I didn't hear insects or birds or anything, just the crunch of dirt and rocks. I was getting antsy and felt myself getting annoyed. I saw what looked like ripples move on the wall of the canyon. It looked like the reflection you see of water, but the river was still like a mile below. And then my girlfriend stopped walking. She pushed through some thorny bushes and looked straight down. I couldn't believe this was the trail. I asked if there was any snakes or bobcats or anything like that. I felt like a chicken, but I was trying to turn back. She just started climbing down. I looked at the canyon walls. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things, heat exposure or whatever they call it. I stood there and watched her go down this steep-ass trail. She knew what she was doing. I was looking and focusing on the path she was taking, so I could copy her. And then I heard this strange vibrating sound coming from the sky. You know those frequencies you feel as much as you hear? It was like that. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and then suddenly the sound whizzed off over the canyon above me. The eerie silence returned. My girlfriend waved at me. She had made a lot of progress down the trail while I listened to that sound. "Are you coming or what?" she yelled up at me. I started down toward her. It was steep, all the rocks were loose, and anything I grabbed was sharp. I was fumbling for a hold when I heard that sound again. I looked up. I didn't see anything, but there was definitely something making that noise. It sounded like a machine, but a machine I've never heard before or since. I looked down and saw my girlfriend looking up at the sky too. I wasn't hearing things. Good, I think. The sound stopped again. This time, it just stopped abruptly. Not like the first time I heard it, when it seemed to move really fast. I stood there on the side of the trail and found myself unable to move. I had a bad feeling. I don't get weird feelings like this, so I wasn't sure if I should listen to it. I really didn't want to go any further on this hike. As I stood there, all of a sudden, the sound returned and was louder than before. It was closer. I could feel it. A swarm of flies or insects came out of this hole in the rocks and flew away. It freaked me out. When I stepped back, I swear I saw some kind of glistening reflection moving in that canyon. It was circular and rising upward. I could feel the noise coming from that. I yelled to my girlfriend. I was pouring sweat now. My whole body was on edge. She climbed back up to me and took one look at me and believed I wasn't feeling good. I kept my eyes on the sky as we climbed back up the trail. I was watching my girlfriend too, to see if she noticed anything. When the ground was mostly flat, we stopped to drink some water. Before either of us took a sip, we felt that vibration. We looked at the cup and the water was shaking. We looked at each other and we both knew. The sound grew louder, and I could feel it in my chest and my ears. We felt wind coming at us as something, and yeah, I know this sounds insane, something invisible rose from the canyon. I could see that strange reflection again. Something was there. My girlfriend took my hand. We watched it as it rose slowly and hovered above the canyon. It just hummed that frequency. Then a pop of the air, and that sound and feeling were gone. It disappeared. My girlfriend has been obsessed ever since. She has friends online and they talk about these kinds of sightings. What does it mean and all of that? But I've just been afraid. This is my first time I've told my experience. I can still feel that vibration when I think about it, anytime there's no sound. I'm hoping this reaches someone else who has experienced something like I have. Nobody I've talked to believes me, and it makes me feel crazy. Even my mom and dad laughed at me, and they're supposed to be supportive, right? I've been called a nerd and a dork because I like astronomy. All my friends rolled their eyes when I asked for a telescope for Christmas instead of a PlayStation like all the other kids wanted. But that's what I did. And I have seen some cool stuff up there in the sky. I always check the weather reports. Clear nights are a gift for anyone interested in watching the stars. I passed my driver's test the month before, so I had the freedom to drive where I wanted to and set up my telescope. I drove further than I had before. Not really far, but maybe 30 minutes from where I live. The area where I went is quiet. A big bluff overlooking a quiet beach area. I was stoked because the sky was mostly clear, and there was only a few clouds. There was no rain in the forecast. I set up my telescope and made sure everything was perfect. I was just about ready to start observing the sky when I noticed a shadow crossing over me. Everything went dark for a moment. I looked up and saw something moving just out of my vision. It looked like a bat, but it was way bigger. I thought maybe there were eagles or some other kind of nocturnal bird flying around. I looked up at the sky and waited to see what was up there again. Whatever I saw didn't come back. Felt a little spooked. Probably just being out at night alone. There's nothing dangerous around there unless you're afraid of mosquitoes, maybe. I brushed it off, remembering my scientific mind. I set my eye to the telescope and looked out to see the stars. Everything up there was beautiful, and in a second or two I forgot about seeing any shadow flying above me. And that's exactly when it happened again. This time I had my eye looking through the telescope, and my vision went black. I jumped back and knocked my telescope over. I barely grabbed it in time before it went crashing down. I looked up and again saw something strange and shadowy moving across the sky. It had wings and maybe was the size of a person. I couldn't tell from where I stood. It made me really uneasy. This thing was massive. Then I felt very alone out there with just my telescope. I wished I had brought a friend or my dad, but nobody else cared about looking up at the stars. I stood there and watched the sky for maybe about 15 minutes or so. I couldn't peel my eyes off the sky. I expected to see it at any moment. I couldn't tell if I was scared or curious. I was a little of both, I guess. Nothing flew overhead. I thought it was probably an optical illusion, or maybe my brain just made it all up. After all, I did spend a lot of my time looking through a telescope hoping to see things. I was about to put my telescope away and go back to my car and just leave when I saw the shadow again. It soared directly above me. I was awestruck. I thought it could be the military doing some flight suit experiment. It looked like a man. I was confused, and now I was truly scared. As I watched it cross over the sky, two red glowing eyes looked down at me. I almost screamed. I stumbled and watched it do this arcing turn in the sky and come back toward me. The eyes seemed to be locked in on me. It was coming directly at me, I'm certain of it. It came lower and lower, and those eyes never blinked at all. I could see now it was definitely something like a man, but thin, like it needed to eat. The skin was almost translucent black. It had wings. They were black and shiny. I had no intention of that thing getting anywhere near me. I left my telescope there and just ran to my car. I felt stupid when I locked the door, like it would protect me from whatever the hell that thing was. I sat there and just tried to catch my breath for a moment. I collected my thoughts as best as I could and looked up at the sky through my car window. I braced myself to see it diving right toward me, but it was gone. I went to the other side of the car and looked. There was nothing up there except the night sky and a couple of clouds. I sat there in the driver's seat for a while. Every minute or so, I would look up above. Half of me hoped to see it so I would know I wasn't crazy, and the other half of me hoped I wouldn't see anything at all. I knew I had to get out of there. I was about to open the door and run and collect my telescope as fast as possible when the windshield of my car darkened. The shadow of that thing. It was flying directly above me again. I said the hell with my telescope and turned the key in the ignition. I've never driven that fast in my life, and I probably looked crazy because I kept checking out the window for a shadow following me, or to see those red eyes glowing up there in the sky. I wasn't driving as safely as I should have, but I couldn't help it. I needed to outrun whatever it was with those red eyes. I spent the entire drive home so scared of whatever was flying around up there that I forgot an excuse to tell my parents about my telescope. I know this is the kind of place to share this. No one really believes me. They listen, but I know they really don't believe anything I'm about to say. Anyway, I went to see family in Phoenix. I go every few months. No one likes that I live in Chicago. You know how it can be with family. If you're not living 10 minutes away, the sky is going to fall. All hell will break loose, you know? I get with my cousins. We're hanging out with a few of their friends, and they want to go outside the city to a park with a big rock in the shape of a ring. I'm down. That seems okay. They say we might even see a rattlesnake or a desert hare or something. I could see some animals in the wild. Why not? We grab a few drinks and we jump in my cousin's Jeep, and they go into a pickup and we go. It was almost dark, like the sun was just ready to disappear. We get there. It didn't take too long. I don't know, maybe like 20 minutes max. There were a few other cars, not too many. I guess most people were leaving because it was getting dark. We park next to a little lake or a pond, open a few drinks and start throwing rocks, skipping them across the water. It was weird though. Someone across the parking lot was fighting with their dog. He was going nuts, and the owners were trying to pull him into their car. He was whining and barking and thrashing around in their arms. I've never seen a dog do that before. We just kind of watched, and the owner seemed embarrassed. We should have paid more attention to that dog. We really should have. So we started walking around and goofing around. You know how people are with their family and friends. One guy was looking for snakes. My cousin said to watch out for killer bees. Apparently they're an issue now in Arizona, and people keep running into them. I was nursing my drink as I'm really not a big drinker and never have been. It was hot, and I'm not used to the heat anymore. You get used to your new surroundings. Chicago, even in the summer, is nowhere near Arizona heat. We all were walking around the park, and I started to help look for snakes, overturning some rocks, rattling through some of the tall grass with a stick. I've never actually seen a rattlesnake outside of the zoo. I've heard them while walking. They rattle to scare you away, but I actually never seen one. My cousin and his friends convinced me it would be cool to see. I guess I felt braver with the stick in my hand. Sounds kind of corny now, though. We didn't find any snakes. We saw some birds and someone yelled about a lizard that they found on a rock. We were just laughing and talking and telling stories. My cousin's friends asked me about Chicago and what living there was like. They had spent pretty much their entire lives in Arizona and never gone that far north. It's kind of a different world, I suppose. I didn't think anything I was saying was interesting, but they seemed to want to know. That's when we started hearing these noises. Weird whining at first. Someone said it was coyotes, so we began to walk around looking for them. They apparently have no fear of humans anymore, I guess. We climbed up some rocks and looked around. We couldn't really see anything, and it was getting darker. My cousin said that sometimes sound is weird in the desert, and maybe they were farther away. We heard it again, and a kind of a yipping noise, but it sounded like there was more than one now. It sounded closer. I didn't see anything until my foot slipped when I tried to get higher up on the rocks. At first, it was just a shadow out of the corner of my eye, and then I saw a tail, and it looked like it could have been a coyote. I ran down to some rocks that were right below me, and I stood really still and quiet. I've seen a coyote before from far away, never up close. I knew they didn't really fear people anymore. They'll run right past you, or go into your garbage and rummage around for food. I've even heard people say that they'll come to your front door looking for food if they're really brave. Everybody seemed to just stop and look around them. Nobody even whispered to each other. We kept hearing things moving, brushing past rocks. It was pretty eerie. Hearing things moving around you but not being able to see them, or really tell in what direction they were moving. I turned to my cousin and he just mouthed that he was freaked out. I just smiled and turned back, looking left and right, trying to pin down what was moving around us. I thought it ran down behind some of the rocks, maybe 10 or 15 feet below me, but then something stood up like a person, and its eyes flashed like a dog's or a cat's when they catch light. And I heard the yipping again right next to me. I turned and then turned back and saw the coyote running off. My cousin saw it too. We were incredibly freaked out. The thing that is really crazy about all this is the coyote wasn't running away on all fours. It was running away on two legs. My cousin doesn't even tell the story anymore because no one believes us. They just think that we're making it up for attention. My mom said it was the time that the light and the dark were playing tricks on us. I know what I saw though. I still can't figure out why this coyote would be walking on two legs. After 10 years, I feel like I'm finally ready to share my story. I hope you read it on your channel, because finding out there were others like me finally made me feel somewhat sane again. This was in 2012 in Long Island, New York, just a few weeks after Hurricane Sandy hit. Beyond the massive damage, the hurricane had really messed up the striper fishing season. After getting out of work around midnight one night, I decided to hit the beach for a few hours and try my luck anyway. It would be too cold soon to go again, and I had already bought a new fishing rod I wanted to try out. When I pulled into my normal spot, the small dirt parking lot was completely empty. Usually there would be a few other fishermen down on the beach, but it looked like I had the beach all to myself that night. Walking down the hill and onto the sand, there was this driftwood and trash everywhere. The storm had really messed things up and washed all kinds of stuff onto the beaches. I even heard stories of some crazy deep sea species found in a few places not too far away, and was thinking maybe I would find one too. Besides being empty, the beach was oddly quiet, like really quiet. Usually there were some baitfish jumping out of the water, and handfuls of seagulls squawking along the beach. But tonight, it was just dead silent, the only noise being my sandals crunching on the sand. Even the waves seemed to be muted somehow. Not wanting to walk too far from the trail back to the parking lot, I walked straight out to the edge of the surf and tied up my gear. I was very familiar with this stretch of the beach and knew that about 100 feet out, the bottom dropped off quickly into the 40-foot deep range. I cast out, then took a seat on the sand, ready to blank out until I caught something or got tired and went home. It didn't take long. About 15 minutes, my line went taut and started pulling slowly but forcefully to the right. I jumped with excitement, thinking it may be a shark since stripers tend to jerk the line around when it's hooked. In my excitement, I pulled back hard on my fishing rod. I immediately felt the line go slack. Crap, I broke the line, I thought. I started to reel back in fast so I could retie my line and cast back out and try to catch this thing. As soon as I reeled in about 10 feet of line, it went tight again. I stopped, and then again, the line went limp. I repeated this cycle a few more times until I came to the realization that whatever was out there was headed directly toward me. I stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what kind of fish or sea critter behaved this way. And then I saw it. The moonlight reflected off of some kind of black spiny ridge sticking out of the water. The ridge alone, at least the portion I could see, had to be about 10 feet long. Then I noticed something else. There was water at my feet a moment ago. There was now only wet, soggy sand. The waterline was receding away from me, and fast. I could see clumps of seaweed and shells and a few crabs moving quickly to get out of the way of this thing. Watching the water wash over and then away from this thing was like watching one of those game shows where they pull back the cover on a brand new car. Only the thing under this cover was a complete nightmare. Granted, the moon was shining, but it was still pretty dark, and the complexion on this thing made it hard to tell where it began and where the sand ended. I figured whatever it was had to be at least 30 feet long. I stood transfixed, not knowing what it was or what I should do. Then it started moving. What looked like the upper body of this thing raised high off the sand. In the darkness, the only feature I could really make out was this snake-like head. And right in the center of that, two bright points of yellow light that looked like eyes. This thing started doing a weird swaying motion with its head and body, moving slowly left then right, its eyes sweeping up and down the beach searching for something. My hand was going numb from clutching my fishing rod so tightly that I had to drop it. I don't know if it was the noise or the movement, but the second the rod hit the sand, the creature had snapped in my direction. It locked eyes with me. It held its gaze for what seemed like minutes, but was probably only a few seconds. Then subconsciously, I took a step back, and then everything happened at once. I then saw the water start rushing back in my direction, moving much quicker than it should have been on a calm night. At the same time, the creature lowered its head and began a lightning-fast slither right in my direction. I bolted. I wasn't in great shape at the time, but I turned and ran with every ounce of strength and speed that I could muster. I could feel the incoming water nipping at my heels and hear the splashing that creature's wriggling body was making as it came for me. Finally, I got to the hill and scraped my fingers and my knees up in my rapid ascent. Not nearly brave enough to look back, I dashed towards my car, ripped open the door and slammed the keys into the ignition. I looked up through the windshield and could see the thing's head just starting to crest over top the hill. I threw my car into reverse and started driving so fast that a huge cloud of dust kicked up all around the front of my car. That's probably what saved me. Flipping on the headlights and looking back over the dash quickly, I could just see the outline of this creature in the dust cloud, its head whipping back and forth trying to locate the sound of my car. I drove in reverse the entire quarter-mile back to the main road. I didn't even care that I left my tackle and my new fishing rod on the beach. I still don't know what I saw that night. Frankly, I don't want to know. Shortly afterwards, I sold a bunch of my fishing gear and threw out the rest. I hope someone can relate to this so I know I'm not going crazy. I don't know what to make of this, or neither do my friends. Maybe some of you can help us understand what the hell happened. I went on a camping trip with a few of my close buddies a few weeks ago in Oregon. We hiked a few trails in the deeper part of the woods, but we remembered where we parked the car and tried to stay within a reasonable distance. We decided to settle in a clearing that was off the trail for at least a mile. A giant rock is our guide to the entrance and exit of our camp. As long as we can find the rock, we know we wouldn't get lost. We thought we had a good couple of hours before the sunset. We were very wrong. There was at least an hour left of daylight the last time I checked. I pulled out my phone and it was only 4:45 p.m. in the summer. It wasn't that dark yet, so we just put our backpacks down where we settled down. Since we could still see each other, we decided to split up It makes setting up camp go faster. I collected stones for the campfire walls. Mason gathered wood. Josh would stay behind and set up the tents. And Austin got ready to cook dinner. I couldn't really find big enough rocks, so I went a little further into the woods. This part of the forest was a bit denser than the rest, and I thought I was gone for only a few minutes. But then I heard Josh calling for me. I came back to our site, and our conversation went like this. I said, "What's up? I heard you yell my name." "What?" Josh said. "You yelled my name. What do you need?" "I didn't say your name." "Really?" I went back to where I left off and grabbed a few more stones. When I got back to our pit area, I started setting them up in a circle. Mason started setting his sticks into the pit when I was finished. By now, we had a campfire. Our tents were just about set up, and Austin was dragging out the cooler with all the meat we packed for the trip. We got the fire going, and we were just sitting around the fire telling stories. After a while, we heard some rustling in the bushes. We looked over and shined our flashlight over there where we heard a noise. All we saw was a large buck running away. It was strange, but again, we were in the middle of the forest. After we sat around the fire for a while, my friends and I were ready to call it a night. We got in our tents and we went to bed. I woke up a few hours later hearing someone or something in our cooler. I unzipped my tent and shined my flashlight around the campsite. I looked until I saw a shape near our supplies. It was that buck again. I could only see the right side of it, but it was just that deer getting into our cooler. Wait a minute, that's the meat cooler. Why would a deer be eating meat? Before I could think of anything else, I saw the deer get up on two legs and arch its head up. It looked like it was sniffing in the air for something. Then it started to scream. This scream was not normal for a deer, or any animal for that matter. I quickly zipped my door back up and turned off my flashlight. I thought if whatever the hell that was didn't know I saw it, then it should go away. I waited for what felt like hours before I decided to peek outside again. When I peeked out, I saw a red eye staring back at me. That deer, or whatever the heck it was closer and staring right back at me. It wasn't right up against the tent, but this thing had this sinister smile on its face, and it was smiling at me. I saw half of its face rotting off, and I gagged when I smelled it. I yelled for my friends to get out of their tents and run to the car. I went past the rock and made a beeline for our car. I felt like I was running forever until I saw it, and I unlocked it using my key fob. I looked at the trail and saw my friends running to the car as well. It looked like I wasn't the only one who saw it. We couldn't speak. Even if we wanted to, no words would come out. We don't even know how to explain what we saw. That night, we slept in the car with the doors locked. We didn't go back until morning to retrieve our stuff. God forbid we run into that thing again. When we got back to the campsite in the morning, everything looked pretty normal. Nothing else was taken. There were no rips in any of the tents, nothing. We still decided we wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. So we packed everything up and we started to leave. We drove off and put the forest miles behind us. We never wanted to go back to that spot again. Thanks for sharing these stories. I listened to them all and wanted to share one of my experiences. Please don't use any part of my name if you decide to use this. To begin with, I want to say this story is 100% true. I'm not here to waste time typing up a story just to get some attention. So my whole life, I've had paranormal experiences, enough to probably write a book about. But this one I wanted to post because I was pretty shocked it happened. About a year ago in August of 2021, I started to get into skinwalker and wendigo stories. So I started listening to them a lot and reading also. I've known about these things for a while, but they never really piqued my interest until recently for some reason. So one hot night I was up late listening to stories. I decided to turn on the ghost hunting app for fun, one that flicks through radio frequencies and puts out words. After a little while of listening, the app actually said my name as one of the words, and the tone of the words started getting much darker, which is not too odd, but it seemed a lot darker than normal. Finally, it came up with the word disembowel. I was a bit freaked out and didn't realize that that was part of the vocabulary in the app. At that point, I shut the app off because I was a little uneasy. Later that night, I went for a walk, which is normal for me during the spring and the summer. I like to take long walks at night. I live in the western suburbs outside of Detroit, so my walks are always throughout my huge neighborhood. As I was walking, I was coming up on a tree, and at the bottom of the tree I saw what almost looked like a piece of really old paper. It was standing up, but the second I looked at it, it flew up and away, so fast that I questioned myself on what I saw. As I walked further, I smelled something like rot or a dead animal for a couple of minutes, which is odd because there were no dumpsters around or garbage that I could see around to cause it. The smell happened a couple of times as I was walking, and I thought to myself, no way is there anything like a skinwalker around. It's just a coincidence that these things are making me overthink, because I've been listening to so much of this stuff. Over the next couple of nights, something started killing the front and back lawn. A big dead spot that looked like some huge dog peed on it showed up in the front, and these deep dug holes in the back, which I had never seen before or since, showed up. Finally, after about a week, I was out walking late one night when something sounded like it slammed off a screen door on a house with a dark porch across the street from where I was. A loud bang, and although it sounded violent, I figured maybe someone had just left the house. I saw a dark shape moving down the driveway out of the corner of my eye. I still did not want to stare as I thought someone was leaving, and I didn't want to startle them since I was out so late. As I kept walking, though, I started hearing this strange moaning sound which was odd, and still trying to pay it no mind. I now noticed the dark shape was coming down the driveway. It looked to be about 4 feet tall, and so dark that I could see the white eyes and the teeth clearly. It seemed like it was kind of wobbly, like it was drunk. I kept walking without acknowledging it, and it didn't seem to follow me, but I was still confused, and not yet scared, until I looked back, and I heard it making a choking sound like a cat coughing up a fur ball. I clearly saw this thing shaking each time it made the choking sound. It was about 50 feet away now, and I could clearly see it was on 2 legs and completely black, but it also looked hairy. At this point, I just turned away and kept going. I think by showing no interest or fear it left me alone. And the only reason there wasn't fear was because I didn't realize what I was actually seeing until I was well past it. I didn't go back that way that night to get home, and I'm still unable to explain it all other than my sudden interest in these things actually brought one to me. I have not seen or had anything else happen after that night, but I did tone down my interest and use of the ghost hunting app. Another strange thing is when I look into my word history for that app, it never recorded the word disembowel. All the other words are there in the list. I guess you don't have to be in the woods or desert to attract these things, so be careful with your interests. Thanks for reading. I've been a park ranger for a long time. I've moved around between parks some, though. I like to get the feel for different parts of the country. 10 years ago, I was working in Pennsylvania, in the Michaud State Forest. There'd been a group of scouts camping there, and I made sure to stay aware of them in case they needed anything. I'd go by their camp once a day to look things over. I periodically would check in with Mike, the group leader, and confirm that all was good. But one evening when I went by as usual, Mike mentioned that some of the scouts had heard something strange. Apparently, the older kids had sent some of the younger ones on a mission. I guess there's some kind of tradition called a snipe hunt, where you get a bag and a flashlight and get sent into the woods at night. The rule is you're not allowed to come back until you've caught a snipe. Except, there isn't really such animal in the woods. Snipes don't exist. I guess it's kind of a kid's version of hazing to initiate the younger kids. Anyway, these kids have gotten freaked out by something they said sounded like a really high shrieking noise. Some of the kids swore it sounded like a child. I was convinced it was just overactive imaginations, and maybe a screech owl, but these kids were seriously freaked out. They swore there was something very not right about it, so I decided to camp out in that area that night, and sort of keep watch and keep my ears open. I figured I'd set up camp in the same area of the reports. I got some gear out of my cabin and followed Mike and a few kids into the woods. I went about 100 yards or so before we came to the bank of a creek, then followed the creek up for a bit until we came to a fork. I set up my tent and got a fire going. It was around 7 p.m. by then, and I was ready to hunker down for the night. I was hungry and was heating some food on my propane stove. But it wasn't before long that I started feeling like something was watching me. Now that's really unusual for me. I've been level-headed and not prone to getting spooked, but I felt really odd and uncomfortable right then. The woods there are thick, and there's a fair amount of wildlife, especially white-tailed deer and raccoons. I was used to the feeling of animals around. After I ate my dinner, I was just sitting by the fire reading, when all of a sudden there was this really high-pitched shriek. It seemed to be upstream. I thought it sounded like an owl at first, but a few minutes later, it happened again. I couldn't tell how far away it was, but it lasted for several seconds and seemed to fade in and out. I got up and walked a few yards into the woods expecting to hear the sound again, but then it stayed quiet for a long time. I've heard bobcats, owls, and rabbits scream, and none sounded even close to this. I stayed attentive to it for an hour or so, but I heard nothing. I finally decided to try to get some sleep, but I was restless and just kept waking up to listen. The next morning, I was making some breakfast and Mike came by to ask if I heard anything. I told him about the shrieking and said it sounded unlike anything that should be in the park. And I admitted to him that I was still having this weird sense of being watched. I told him that it was strange enough to me, that I decided to stay another night to see what I could figure out. This time, I decided I would try not to sleep at all. There was a full moon, and a lot of woods and creek were visible. Around 1 a.m., I walked out to a spot to relieve myself, and almost instantly felt this really heavy presence. I stood completely still and listened as hard as I could. Then I walked about 50 feet when out of nowhere to my right, this dark figure with bright red eyes came into view. It was standing by the creek. I swear it looked like some kind of giant bat, but human-like at the same time. And I'm totally serious about that. It seemed to look right through me, and then suddenly it shot straight up into the air. There was this whooshing sound that felt like the air sucked in when it flew up. Then, a few seconds later, I heard another shriek, but this time it was moving away from me and getting quieter. I ran back to the campsite and got my notepad and tried to draw what I had seen. It had seemed like it was around 6 feet tall or so, and had these strange protrusions from its back that I came to realize were wings. There was no doubt about the bright red eyes, but that thing had swooped off so fast I hadn't had time to get a flashlight on it. If it hadn't been a full moon, I might have not have seen it at all. A big part of me wanted to leave, but I decided to stay the rest of the night and watch for it to reappear and make some sounds. In the end, nothing else happened, but that feeling of being watched stayed with me. I told Mike about it the next morning, and since the scouts were scheduled to leave that afternoon, we decided not to say anything to the kids. We just chalked it up to a wild animal. But holy crap, these kids weren't kidding. That sound was unearthly. I went ahead and made my reports. I don't know what to say, but I never believed in such things as this. But I guess we all get older and wiser, if wiser is what you want to call it. Hopefully someone will discover a logical answer someday, and hopefully I won't be here anymore. First off, I want to let you know that I'm a big fan, and I've been watching your content for a while now. I've always been interested in the supernatural and encrypted hunting. There's way more out there than what the government or mainstream media wants you to know. I'm happy there's channels like you that bring these issues to light. I think my affinity for these stories began when I saw my first cryptid back in 1973. I was only 11 years old, but that day has stuck with me for my entire life. The image of the creature was burned into my mind, and I became obsessed with trying to see it again. Well, now it's nearly 50 years later, and yesterday I came into contact with this type of beast once again. I was born and raised in Albany, New York, and have always been curious about nature and animals. I spent a great deal of time exploring the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. We're situated right between the Catskills and the Adirondacks, and there are tons of trails throughout the area. I'm going to start with my first interaction with the creature. Then I'll tell you all about what went down yesterday. It was in the 70s, so things were a bit more wild and free. I would spend most of my days running around with friends and my brother in the city and surrounding suburbs. We would buy candy and play pranks on the store owners. Some summers we'd stay over at my aunt's house, which was just down the road from Pine Bush. These summers were amazingly fun, and we felt like we had the whole preserve to ourselves. After what we encountered, I knew that wasn't true. The most interesting part of the preserve are the sand dunes. Now, we're right smack dab in the middle of upstate New York. You don't expect soil to look like a beach. The barren sands are often going up in smoke since they are so dry and desolate. But there's a great deal of critters living in these woods, even on the dunes. I went out exploring one day by myself because my brother was at horse camp or something. I was walking through the sandy terrain when I saw a dog on top of a dune. I tried calling over to it, thinking it had gotten lost away from its owner. It didn't move when I called, so I started towards it. From a distance, it looked like any old dog. It was skinny and I could see the shadows of its rib cage sticking out from under its skin. It was blackish brown with these tall legs and a long snout. As I walked towards it, it began to growl. I started to see it clearer now. It had scaly reptilian skin. It was definitely not a dog. I was scared, so I backed away slowly. Well, actually, I think any sane person would do the same. It started to move towards me. It moved low to the ground and stuck out this long pink tongue. I turned to run but never looked back. I don't think it ended up chasing me and I never saw it again. This day stuck in my mind for the rest of my life. I told my friends and family about what I had seen, but nobody had believed me. They thought I was making the story up for attention. I never went walking in the woods after that. But for the rest of my life, I stayed curious. It wasn't until just yesterday that I saw it again. I was driving past a preserve on my way to make some deliveries. I work as a postman these days and take a few routes that take me into the more desolate parts of the country. I was going about 65 when I first spotted it, but then I slowed down right away. There was a dead deer carcass on the side of the road. It had been out there for at least a day. I'd seen it as I passed the day before. It was bloated and very clearly a buck, a decent size with a pair of half-grown antlers. It had a bit of attention from bugs, but it wasn't in bad shape at that point. The creature was ripping at it now, and it was barely recognizable as a deer. It sunk its teeth in and used its long tongue to lap up the coagulated blood. It was disgusting. I looked at it in my rearview mirror. I just couldn't believe my eyes. Of course, this would be the time that my iPhone was dead, so I didn't get any photos or videos, but I definitely know what I saw. I started to put my truck into reverse so I could get a closer look. I pulled back slowly, but the thing didn't even notice that I was getting closer. My windows were open and the smell of rotting flesh and sewage wafted into my truck. I tried to hold my breath, but it was just this terrible smell that started to make my eyes water. I closed them for a moment to try to push out the tears, and when I opened them again, the creature was walking towards my car. I sat there for a moment and stared at it. It walked right towards my truck door and just sat about 6 feet away. Now, I got a really good look at this thing, and I didn't even have a chance to notice the smell because my heart was racing so fast. It was hideous and drooling. Its entire face and neck and chest were covered in blood and the guts from the deer. Its ears flicked back and forth, and its back arched like it was going to pounce. Once I saw that, I knew I had to get out of there. I stepped on the gas and it actually started chasing me. I thought maybe I could lead it into town or towards the ranger station so someone could get a photo or shoot it. I kept starting and stopping, going about 30 miles an hour, and the thing was keeping right up with me. Eventually another car started to come towards me, and I flashed my brights to signal to them. Once the thing saw the other car, it ducked back into the brush. It was gone, and I don't even think that car even got a good look at it. I hope maybe they did so at least someone else would know what I'm talking about. My family is pissed that I'm back on this again, but I hope you guys will appreciate the story. Let me know what you think. I came across your channel while doing some paranormal research on things that have happened to me recently. It is both terrifying and comforting to know that a lot of people in your world have had similar occurrences to mine. After binging your channel to find cases like my own, I figured it's only fair that I contribute to the channel and share what happened to me. Maybe this will help someone else make sense of their own paranormal occurrence. I'm a general contractor. I started in construction after high school and worked my way up over the years. I'm no master at anything in particular, but I can just build about anything after years of working on different jobs. I started up my own company about 7 years ago. Every contractor has a few weird stories. Any job that involves working with the public, especially in their homes, is bound to expose you to strange situations. But few contractors have stories bordering on the paranormal. Lucky me. It started out normal. I was hired to install a new septic tank for a young couple who just bought their first home. This was before housing prices skyrocketed, but they were still very budget conscious. The place was an old turn-of-the-century farmhouse that was in pretty bad shape. They bought the old house thinking they could use the money they saved to fix it up. I've seen this happen a lot with younger people. Trendy social media videos and HGTV make millennials think that they can buy a fixer-upper and make it their own. They quickly realize that it takes more than a plucky attitude to do major renovations. It pissed me off at first. I felt insulted that so many kids thought my job was so easy that they could do it without any training. But then I realized how much money I was making when they found out they bit off more than they could chew. So I made my peace with it. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Creepy old farmhouse equals standard ghost encounter. But I never actually stepped foot inside the house. I was digging in the backyard to install the septic tank when I made an unfortunate discovery. Bones. And a lot of them. 9 times out of 10 when you dig up a bone, it belongs to an animal. But if I'm ever in doubt, I call the police and report it immediately. It's illegal to continue to dig at a site that may have human remains, and I don't make it a habit of risking my contractor's license. The cops came. The forensic team confirmed the bones were human, and a special crime scene excavation team dug the rest of the bones without disturbing their placement. Over 24 skeletons were arranged in 2 circles, one inside the other, surrounding a large elk skull in the center. The forensic team said the bones were a few hundred years old, at least early colonial times, but probably even earlier. It was clear that the burial site was not normal based on the arrangement of the bodies, and there were clear scrape marks on most of their neck bones. The forensic team said it indicated the victims had their throats slit. The whole site looked like some kind of sacrificial ritual. I didn't think on it too much more. History is fascinating, but I was more concerned with them finishing up the excavation so I could get back to work on the septic tank and get paid. But that night, something strange happened. I knew it was a dream instantly, which is strange because I never had that happen before. I was in my room, but there was no ceiling. I saw stars above me, but they were strange colors and moving around erratically. Then, an antlered figure appeared in the room and circled around me. He, or it, had markings all over its body. I don't know if they were tattoos or paint, but they twisted up and around his body in deliberate patterns. He wasn't showing any signs of aggression, but his presence was menacing. He just kept circling me. His face was stern but confused. Then, in the blink of an eye, he shoved me hard in the chest and knocked me back into my bed. I woke up with a pain in my chest. I shrugged off the nightmare, but I had a red mark in the shape of a hand on my chest. That was a lot harder to shrug off. The entire time I drove to the work site, I had a feeling of uneasiness. When I got there, the owner came out to see me, and there was a moving truck in the driveway. He was clearly upset about something, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. He said he didn't want to dig the septic tank anymore, and that he was planning on selling his place anyway. I asked him why he didn't call me. He shook his head and said he was sorry, and that he completely forgot about the septic tank. He looked really shaken up. I asked him if he had a nightmare. His eyes went wide, but he tried to play it off. We stood there for a minute in silence. I could tell he wanted to say something but couldn't. I would have left it at that, but I noticed a bruise around his arm, like someone had grabbed him roughly. He noticed me staring at his arm. "Did you see him?" he asked me. "Yeah," I responded. I unbuttoned my shirt to show him the handprint on my chest. He looked astonished, and then oddly relieved. He didn't say anything else after that. He just nodded to me and I left. Part of me wanted to ask for details to compare his dream to mine, but I thought it best to let sleeping dogs lie. It might be a little anticlimactic, but the kid clearly didn't want to talk about it. I try not to drive at night anymore, especially not during the winter. Just something about the headlights bouncing off the snow that reminds me of the terror I felt that night. It's supposed to be a happy time of year. Everyone is warm and cozy and enjoying time with their families. I was actually coming home from our corporate Christmas party. I work in Farmington, Connecticut, but live on the outskirts. I'm just far enough to be away from the noise and the pollution. There's a lot of farmland and some people own property out here for hunting. It's a longer commute, but it's worth it to me. I've thought about moving back to the city. Maybe that would help my paranoia. I don't know exactly what I saw. I've read descriptions that are similar to it, but I feel like it's impossible to know for sure. It was big, way too big to be a person. It was moving on the side of the road, fully illuminated by my headlights and their reflection off the snowbanks. Its legs were way too long to be any normal person. Imagine the tallest basketball player you've ever seen. It was like that, but another 5 feet taller. The steps it took were so big. It felt like it could keep pace with my car. Of course, that could have been because I had subconsciously taken my foot off the gas, entranced and stunned by what I was seeing. As my car coasted closer to whatever it was, I began to be able to make out more of its features. Its muscles were huge, and its shoulders were enormous. Coasting closer allowed me to see its hands, too. They were the size of a large pizza. In one of its massive hands, it grasped something bloody. I couldn't tell exactly what it was. Maybe a deer limb or something. A white bone jutted out of the mass of fur and blood. Something red and oozing trailed behind the massive figure. At this point, I realized I wasn't accelerating. I was absolutely terrified. I couldn't think or breathe, and my brain struggled to figure out how to get my foot back on the gas pedal. I was coasting dangerously close to this monster, close enough to see the winter wind blowing its hair. Its hair was thick and coarse, like a bear. I went to a bear sanctuary once and had a chance to pet a cub. Its hair was so coarse and black. It looked just like this bear cub's hair, but I knew for sure this was no bear. Bears are square-shaped and have stubby arms and legs. They have a snout and little round ears. This creature had a triangular humanoid torso, and its limbs weren't anything near stubby. Its arms were as probably long as my entire body, and one of its hands was still grasping that bloody, fleshy mass. My foot found the gas just as I pulled alongside this beast. I couldn't jam the pedal down fast enough. The beast turned its face towards me, and I saw its eyes. They were these big, black, beady eyes. Its face was vaguely humanoid. The lower jaw jutted out several inches from its upper lip, which was huge. The nostrils of its small, flat nose flared, as if it were picking up my scent. It had a heavy brow, which its wide, black eyes peered out from underneath. As we made eye contact, it gave a sharp jerk of its head. Its body turned towards me and its lips parted, revealing these huge yellow teeth. I punched the gas pedal to the floor. My wheels spun a little on the icy road as I tried to escape. My eyes should have been on the road, but I couldn't peel them away from the rearview mirror. It seemed like the monster tried to run after me, but it soon disappeared into the darkness. When I got home, I could hardly convince myself to get out of the car. I have a small carport that is a few feet from my door. I literally only need to take 6 steps, but that felt like the most terrifying thing I could imagine. I was positive that if I stepped outside the safety of my car, I'd immediately get snatched and become a bloody mass it gripped in its massive hand. I finally got the courage up and sprinted to my front steps. I fumbled a lot with my keys and even dropped them. Every second my heart beat faster and my head swiveled back and forth, checking to see if this 12-foot mass was approaching me. As soon as I got in my house, I slammed the door and locked it. I shoved the couch in front of the front door and my dining table in front of the back door. I didn't have any weapons in my house, just a can of pepper spray. I didn't sleep much that night, or the next. In fact, I've had a lot of trouble sleeping every night since. Like I said, I try not to drive at night anymore. I try not to go out at all at night. I put my trash out long before the sun sets, and I also bought a shotgun from a local farmer, just in case this thing ever finds me. I went on a camping trip with my father in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The first sign of trouble came around dusk. It had been a pretty warm day, so we waited until the sun started setting to begin our fire and prepare our dinner. Dad set the cast iron over the flame, getting it ready to cook the walleye we had caught and filleted earlier. It wasn't long until an awful rotting flesh smell overtook the campsite. At first, we thought maybe the fish had somehow gone bad, but when we checked the fish for a closer sniff, it was clear that the smell wasn't coming from there. We hadn't encountered that smell all day long, not even in the warmest part of the day, when you would think a rotting carcass would be at its worst. Even still, we decided to search the area for any evidence of an animal down and decaying nearby. It would be just our luck to have set up camp near a rotting animal. We walked up and down all the nearby trails, sniffing and looking, but to no avail. There were no rotting corpses that we could find. And even stranger, the rotting smell seemed to get stronger and stronger, no matter where we went. It was as if the entire forest itself was rotting away. All around us. What we did find and found kind of strange were deeply embedded hoof prints that seemed to belong to a very large deer. My dad was especially awestruck by this, having worked with fish and game parks most of his life, and have never seen deer-type prints of that size before. We eventually decided to make our way to the camp, since we hadn't been able to figure out the source of the nasty smell anyway. By that time, it was getting dark out. The smell, of course, only continued to get worse, despite there being no obvious source. When we returned to the campsite, we pulled the fish back out of the cooler and cooked it up. But by that time, neither of us had much of an appetite. As we sat around the fire, poking around at our plates trying to avoid any and all discussion of the surrounding smell, I began to hear something moving around in the far-off brush. "Listen, do you hear that?" I asked Dad. Whatever it was sizable enough to be snapping what sounded to be large branches as it moved through the trees. Dad shrugged. "There's nothing too dangerous about these parts," he said. He was trying to reassure me, but I could tell from his face and the sound of his voice that he was actually a little spooked himself. I thought about asking him if he wanted to pack up and leave early. I was hoping he would say yes, but we were both putting on a good act for each other of pretending we were fine. I was afraid to outright ask him, though, because if I was wrong about him being afraid, I didn't want to look like I was wussing out on our trip. "What the hell?" my dad then yelled. I nearly jumped out of my camp chair. He was staring over my shoulder back into the woods. I turned, and that's when I saw it myself. At first, it looked like a dead tree branches moving around from side to side, back in the trees, about 7 feet off the ground. It was dark, and the moon's light was reflecting right off the pointed sticks for us to see them. One might have thought it was the wind blowing through a dead tree, except there wasn't much of a breeze at all that night, and the movement wasn't in any kind of rhythmic pattern. It seemed to be moving independently from anything else, and all on its own. "Who's out there?" my dad yelled. I'm not sure what it is he thought someone was doing to cause a tree to move in such a way. But what happened next had us both running up the trail for the Jeep. All at once, this figure raised another full foot into the air. Through the darkness shone a pair of glowing yellow eyes. Only when the eyes came into view did we realize that we were staring into what appeared to be a large deer's skull with antlers attached. But it was at least 8 feet off the ground at this point, probably closer to 9. We dropped everything and ran as fast and as hard as we could, back towards the Jeep. We didn't even bring our gear. Once inside, we agreed to head to the hot springs for the night and get a hotel. We'd come back for the gear in the morning when it was light out. We spent the whole night at the hotel wide awake, talking about what we had seen, and hoping that it wasn't real. Being a game fish and parks guy, my dad's initial hypothesis was that it was simply an elderly buck suffering from wasting disease, a sort of a neurological disease for deer that is common in the area and can cause deer to take on a zombie-like appearance. Ultimately, this is what we decided we'd seen, and we figured we both just became spooked in the dead of the night and got jittery from not eating. The next day, though, when we returned to the campsite, that hypothesis was thrown to the wayside. Whatever we had seen had found our sight and completely torn apart our tents. and snuffed out the fire, and tossed everything we had on the forest floor. In the midst of the mess, there was a set of hoof prints at least 10 inches front to back, all over the campsite. And that's only one set, mind you, not two. Whatever had been there was walking on 2 feet. I don't think we'll be back to the hills anytime soon. I'll never forget this really weird thing that happened a few Christmases ago. The circumstances weren't great. It was when we all had temporarily moved back to Lake Superior to be closer to Mom, those being her final few months and all. Cancer's evil. My sister and her new husband were staying in a rental, but my little brother and I slept at Mom's. It was obviously going to be a bleak day, but my brother-in-law was really making an effort to come through for us. He did his part to try and brighten our days. Mom really liked him too, and seeing her happy made me like the guy a little more. On Christmas Eve, my brother-in-law suggested a family hike through the surrounding wilderness. Mom and my sister were more than happy to stay home, and after some persuading on their end, they convinced my little brother to stay back with them. So my brother-in-law and I headed out by ourselves. We hopped in the truck and began the short drive to the base of the hike. I remember that the weather that day was menacing. We drove down a long, flat, ice-covered road for a while, making small talk here and there. I had no problem spending one-on-one time with this guy. As a matter of fact, I was sort of hoping he'd be a little uncomfortable and start making a fool of himself to impress me or something. But the guy was cool as a cucumber the entire time. We pulled off the road and parked in an empty lot next to the trail sign. We grabbed our packs and made sure we were sufficiently bundled and embarked on the hike. We were both silent for a while, just taking in the beauty of the frostbitten wilderness around us. After a while, though, a light snow began to fall, and soon the measly trail was covered. We couldn't exactly see the trail at this point, but we pressed on in the direction we had been going. After a half an hour of trudging through the snow, I was getting a little ticked off. I can't place it now, but I remember feeling something awful for my brother-in-law. But only for a minute. Staring at the back of his head as we trudged through the snow, I pushed the thoughts away. A little while later, he stopped in place, and I nearly ran into the back of him. All at once, something putrid filled the air, and there was no question this was the smell of death. It must have been a decaying moose that got stuck somewhere and froze. Maybe there was another one close by. It was overwhelming. The death was larger than one dead moose. I suggested that the smell was coming from a dead animal, still facing the back of the guy's head. I didn't want to see his face. If he looked like he was going to puke, I was going to puke. "It's coming from over there," he said, almost robotically, and he stepped off the trail we had been following. He began trudging into the thick wilderness to our right, without turning to face me once. I called after him, but he just kept walking towards something. I weighed my options. I could either stand there in the rotten air by myself and wait for him to return, or I could follow him. I didn't want to be alone out there. By the time I made my mind up, he was several paces in front of me, and we were off the trail, and it was snowing, so I couldn't exactly reach out and force him to stop. Whatever he was moving toward was bad. I couldn't only smell it, I could feel it. As we moved, the smell got unbelievably worse. It was as if we wandered onto an old dumping ground filled with decaying roadkill. But it was so much worse than that. A loud noise came from deeper in the woods, from what must have been the source of the awful stench. My brother-in-law sped up and outpaced me. I lost sight of him. I was terrified to be out there alone. The snow was really coming down now, and I asked myself why I ever agreed to go hiking in the middle of winter with this crazy guy. I was snapped out of my own thoughts when I saw it. I thought at first I was looking at an animal, deer legs and matching hooves, snowy and tousled. But then my eyes moved up its body, and I couldn't even find it in myself to scream. The fur of this thing's deer hips curled in towards an emaciated abdomen and ribcage of a human. The skin was torn and stretched and mangled, with pieces of bloodless flesh hanging off. At the 7-foot mark, the skinless head of the creature stared straight at me with glowing yellow eyes. It stood about 10 feet in front of me, towering above the snowdrifts around it. I saw its gummy lips pull back into an evil grin, revealing teeth as sharp as nails and a black tongue. The smell immediately got worse, and it started toward me. There was nowhere to go. I still can't believe what happened next. In comes my brother-in-law with a flare. Like a seasoned quarterback, he threw the lit flare straight at the beast, it bouncing off the thing's bony chest and onto the snow in between the two of us. As the flare's light intensified, this monster unleashed a piercing screech and arched its back. The evilness in its eyes became uncontainable, and it bolted into the wilderness away from us. My brother-in-law and I didn't need to say anything to each other. We just ran back to the car, thanking our lucky stars that we made it out alive. We're still not sure if it was real or not. Maybe just a winter-induced hallucination or something. That I know whatever I stared into that day in the woods was a different sort of evil. Something eviler than cancer. Let me start out by saying that I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means. I believe in science, facts, and numbers. I don't make stuff like this up for attention, and it's important for you to know that. I am first and foremost a pragmatist. That's why I'm hesitant to tell this story. I haven't told anyone until now, because I'm not even sure if I believe what happened to me that day. I'd been living in West Virginia for a few months. I'm an aerospace engineer, and I'd recently been transferred from Washington. I don't really know why I'm sharing this. Anyway, I was still getting used to my surroundings. I'm a big outdoors person, so I had been exploring the hills and hiking in the majority of my free time. It wasn't necessarily a small town, but things could go pretty still for a while, especially when I was out in the woods. As I said, I'm practical, so I knew better than to wander out at night or go anywhere without protection. Something I had always wanted to do was go and explore West Virginia's caverns. I didn't have a ton of experience spelunking, but I found a bunch of information online for first-timers. So one Sunday, I drove out to the caverns. I had all the necessary equipment in my pack, with extras of everything, and I felt pretty confident. I geared up in my helmet, my headlamp, and knee and elbow pads. I looked pretty goofy, I'll tell you that. I began my exploration. The cavern was structured in a way that the spelunker gradually descended several hundred feet before any serious dips or drops revealed themselves. That was when the adrenaline would kick in, and the real exploring would start. As I descended flatly, I passed a handful of groups, a couple trying their hand at adventuring, 2 or 3 seasoned pros here and there, and a family with whining children who cut the flattest part of the caving short and turned back. By the time I reached the end of the warm-up descent, the temperature had dropped considerably. I was thankful I brought an extra layer. I saw a few different tunnels of varying width, branching out into separate explorations. I set out down one passage that was high and wide enough to stand comfortably, though I sensed this comfort wouldn't last. The rock formations were brilliant, and the atmosphere down there was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was so quiet, cool, and serene. The drops became more pronounced, and I figured I was around 300 feet underground at that point. The ground evened out, and the walls of the passage gave way to an open room-like area of the cave. A small glittering pool rippled in the corner. It was so beautiful. I took a minute just to soak it all in. At the far end of the open area, the passage continued, appearing like a black hole leading into nowhere. I suddenly had this feeling. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like claustrophobia, but I'd never had that before. I always loved stuff like this. I pressed on and shrugged away the feeling. It was a lot darker in this new passageway for some reason, and colder too. I hugged my pack tightly against my shoulders. Then I heard something. It was like nails dragging down the sides of the rock walls, but coming from the outside. It wasn't possible. With every step I took forward, the clawing sounds got louder. I was convinced that my mind was just playing tricks on me. I had heard about that happening to spelunkers, but it was just so damn loud at this point, like someone, something, was dragging its nails down a chalkboard just inches from my head. I took another step, and when my foot touched the earth, a powerful gust of wind flew back at me, nearly making me lose my balance. Had someone opened up a pressurized door at the end of this passageway? No, obviously not. Not possible. Whatever it was, The wind was enough to turn me around. I headed back toward the open area, the darkness stalking me from behind. My feet seemed to move on their own. I was practically jogging as I approached the soft glow of the open area with the pool. I marched straight across the adjacent passage. Just before I departed from the clearing, I felt something breathing on my neck. There was no mistaking that feeling for coincidence. I froze and turned. From the blackness of the tunnel on the other side of the room, two red dots were glowing at me. Eyes. Stunned, I blinked. It was suddenly right in front of me, appearing there instantly and impossibly. I couldn't take my eyes from theirs. I could see a reflection of myself in the cave behind me in those orbs. It shifted and I looked at its body for the first time. It could have been me in a costume. I wish it were me in a costume. Around 6 feet tall and distinctively humanoid. The creature was covered in this oily black fuzz like a gigantic fly. It began to spread its arms. No, it was wings. And I was totally consumed by my fear. Impossibly large black bug wings outstretched. They spanned half the length of the creature's body on both sides, and a multitude of tears and rips disconnected the skin from the cartilage. I looked back into its eyes, and the thing was back in the open mouth of the opposite passageway, its eyes still glowing. The faceless mouth of the creature began to open. This was enough to kick me back into gear. Throwing all caution to the wind, I sprinted as fast as I could out of the tunnel. I could hear the scratching noises all around me, following me, and just as I began to let the fear get the best of me, I saw the brighter glow of the cave's base. Needless to say, I made it out of that tunnel. I ran the whole way back to my car, ignoring all the crazed looks in my direction. I still don't believe what I saw. I'm a practical individual, and I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or aliens or anything like that. But I do believe that I outran something terrible that day. I won't be heading back into those caves anytime soon. I was on my way to my uncle's funeral when I saw Bigfoot. It's funny because I probably wouldn't have gone except that I hoped he'd leave me some money. Fat chance though, because he never had much, and if he did, his loser son would get it. But I thought it was worth a try, and even if he didn't, maybe his sister, my Aunt Sue, might give me a few bucks. I had to drive all the way to Ames from Cedar Rapids, where I live, and I wasn't sure my old truck was going to make it. There's a whole lot of nothing on that drive. It's not even interstate. You take State Highway 30 West. The worst thing on that truck was the tires, and that's what I learned when I blew one in the nothing between Cedar Rapids and Marshalltown. Scared the crap out of me when the truck dropped on the passenger side. I wrenched it off the road onto the shoulder. It was summer and pretty hot, so I was glad at least I'd broken down near a bunch of trees. A windbreak, I guess, for all the cornfields. I had a donut spare under the seat, but it was hell to get it out along with that cruddy little jack they come with. I grabbed the lug nut wrench and loosened the nuts before I started jacking up the truck. Just as I got it up and pulled off the tire, I heard a car stop in front of mine. At this point, I didn't care because I'd already done the hard part, so I ignored it and kept putting on the donut. I heard boots scrape on the pavement and looked up to see this big guy. I didn't like the look of him. He had this greasy hair and a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth. "You need some help?" he said. "No thanks, I got it." "Good," he said, "'cause I'm not going to help you. I'm going to rob you." "Aw, come on, man," I said. "I got $10 in my pocket for gas, that's it." He grabbed my hair and pulled. I had no choice. I had to stand up. He was right in my face with this nasty meat breath. "I got nothing," I said. "You got $10? I want it," he said. I was reaching into my pocket when I heard this whooping yell. We both looked toward the sound. I thought at first I was looking at a dude in a gorilla suit, but there was no way. It was too believable, and not quite gorilla-like either. Besides, no one is that tall. The thing had to be at least 10 feet tall. It was barefoot and its feet were huge and hairy. Really, what it looked like more than a gorilla was one of those drawings of prehistoric humans, only big. It had hair bear-like fur really all over its body except for its face. It glared at us back with these black eyes, almost as if we had woken it up. And then it yelled again. Not words, like pre-words, like it was learning to talk. It was angry though. Anyone could see that. And then it started to walk toward us. The dude who was trying to rob me looked scared as hell. He stared at it like he was frozen, and then he ran to his car and left, peeling out like he was running away from the law. I would have gone too, except that donut tire wasn't on yet. But I had a feeling that the thing didn't want to hurt me. Still, I would have at least gotten into my truck if I could have. I couldn't. I just looked at the thing. It stood there until the car was out of sight. Then it looked at me, and I could have sworn it was wondering if I needed help. We looked at each other and said thanks, even though I knew it couldn't understand me. I went back to putting on my tire, and by the time I finished, it was gone. I went over to where I'd seen it, just looking to see if I could find any tracks or anything. I smelled a little urine, but that was all. When I got to the next town, I decided to get lunch. The funeral wasn't until late afternoon, and if I got there early, I'd just have to listen to the same old stories I heard 100 times. I went to a little diner in Marshalltown and ordered an egg salad sandwich and an apple pie. I asked the waitress if she'd heard of any Bigfoot sightings in the area. I wasn't sure if she thought I was crazy at first, because she looked really surprised, but then said, "Yeah, why?" I shrugged and said, "Just wondering." She stood there with her hand on her hip. "Okay, fine. I think I saw him," I said. "Where?" she asked. "On 30, a few miles back." She asked, "Did you get a picture?" Idiot that I was, I hadn't even thought of that. I said no. She shook her head like she didn't believe me, or she thought I was an idiot. I continued to Ames and went to the funeral. My cousin gave a speech about how funny his dad was. He used to claim that he played for the New York Giants, which was a lie, and loved to play pranks on people like putting a cup of water on top of doorways. My uncle didn't leave me anything except for his old guitar. I pawned it and got enough money for a new tire. On the way home, I went by the spot where I'd seen that Bigfoot. I pulled over and sat in the truck for a while to see if he would come. He didn't, and it started to get dark, so I left. That's my story.